As we've learned from the previous episode, Enoch told you who it was written for. Not the empire, not the institution, not the enforcers, the collective, the preacher, or the algorithm. The book of Enoch was written for you. And if that is true, and the evidence says it is, then the question that follows is older than any of the systems EP1 named. It is older than the slave patrol, older than the plantation, older than the ship. Who exactly are you? Before any instrument of destruction existed, God named a people, not a demographic, not a category. A covenant people, specific, identified, spoken over before the captivity began. Genesis chapter 15 verse 13. God speaking to Abraham before a single slave ship had been built, before a single patrol had been chartered, before a single auction block had been constructed. Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. He named the duration. He named the condition. He named the people it would happen to. And then, he named the transport. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. Not as metaphor, but as recorded sacred truth. This is the origin of the story EP2 is about to tell. Not the system's origin, the people's origin, the covenant people, the ones the blueprint was built against, the ones the book of Enoch was preserved for. You are not a demographic that wandered into history's crossfire. You are the people over whom a prophecy was spoken before the captivity existed. That changes the nature of everything that comes next. It began with a logic. A simple, brutal, endlessly adaptable logic that some bodies exist to serve other bodies, that some lives are the raw material from which other lives are built, that the arrangement is natural, necessary, even ordained. Because a system this precise, operating across 400 years, surviving every legal challenge, every uprising, every political realignment, every generation that believed it had finally dismantled it, does not survive by accident. A blueprint this durable has an author, and an author this committed is building against something specific. Not a random population, not an incidental obstacle. The people named in the prophecy. EP1 named the faces, enforcement, the collective, the preacher, the algorithm. 4 instruments, 4 centuries, 1 function that never changed. EP2 asks the question underneath that function. How does a system this large, this precisely targeted, survive every attempt to dismantle it? How does the blueprint outlast the builders? How does the architecture persist when every visible structure around it has been changed, reformed, rebranded, and legislated over? Here is how. Once that logic was written into law, into the slave codes, into the founding documents, into the economic architecture of a nation, it no longer needed anyone to enforce it. It no longer needed anyone to even believe in it. It only needed people to participate in it. And participation, across generations, looks exactly like normal life. Behind the faces EP1 named is a blueprint, a coordinated, organized, funded architecture that connects every individual actor into a unified system. And that blueprint has not only survived every generation. In this generation, it has been upgraded with tools no previous era had access to, tools that reach further than any law, any red line, any courtroom has ever reached. You need to understand what those tools are, and you need to understand them clearly, not to produce fear, but to produce sight. That is what this episode documents. Because you cannot name what you cannot see, and what you can name, you can bring before the God who has already accounted for it, as a seeker and steward of wisdom and truth. Every system this durable has something behind it that is not visible in the individual actors who carry it out. Something that coordinates them without requiring them to coordinate with each other. Something that gives the legislator and the banker and the preacher and the historian a common direction without requiring them to ever be in the same room. That something is an ideology. And this one has been operating on American soil since before the nation had a name. It has gone by different names in different eras. It has worn different clothes, spoken in different vocabularies, manifest destiny, states' rights, law and order, colorblindness, parental rights, aligned itself with different political movements, different economic systems, different theological traditions. But underneath every name and every uniform, the logic has been the same. That this nation was built for a specific people, that its institutions exist to serve that people first, that any arrangement which threatens that order, however legal, however moral, however clearly documented, must be resisted, reformed, or removed. That is not a fringe position in American history. It is the majority position, the one that wrote the founding documents while holding human beings in chains, the one that ended slavery on paper and rebuilt it in practice within a decade, the one that conceded civil rights in the courtroom and dismantled them in the legislature, the one that has never, in 400 years, voluntarily surrendered a single structural advantage without being forced to. The logic is the agent that organized it. But something shifted in the 20th century. The logic that had always organized informally, through custom, through culture, through unspoken agreement among the people who benefited from it, began to organize formally, into think tanks, into legal foundations, into networks of donors and academics and politicians and theologians who understood that the gains of the civil rights era could be reversed, but only if the reversal was systematic, only if it operated at the level of law, of courts, of curriculum, of language itself. Not a conspiracy, a project, documented, funded, published, operating in plain sight for anyone willing to read what was being written. The individual actors EP1 introduced did not find each other by accident. They were operating inside an architecture that was deliberately built to coordinate exactly that kind of action, without requiring any of them to announce what they were doing or why. As we've already discovered, the uniform changes. The logic doesn't. The legal architecture built to dismantle affirmative action took 40 years to construct. It moved through law schools, through Federalist societies, through the deliberate placement of judges at every level of the federal court system. The rollback of the Voting Rights Act did not happen by accident. It happened because a specific legal argument was developed, funded, litigated through the courts over decades, and delivered in Shelby County versus Holder in 2013. The gutting of school desegregation did not happen because attitudes changed. It happened because a coordinated legal strategy systematically dismantled the enforcement mechanisms that made desegregation possible. These are not grievances. They are documented outcomes with named cases, named dates, and named consequences that are still being lived. The project did not hide. It published. It filed briefs. It trained lawyers. It built institutions. It worked in plain sight, counting on the assumption that the people most harmed by it would be too watched, too stretched out financially to mount a sustained response. That assumption has held, and the people who built the architecture are counting on it to stay just as it is for a little longer. As we've seen, every previous iteration of the blueprint required people, which meant every previous iteration had a limit. The limit of human attention, the limit of human hours, the limit of how many people you could deploy before the cost of the deployment became visible. That limit is now gone. By now it should be abundantly clear what you're up against. It's not an experiment, and it's not a pilot program. It's standard infrastructure, already built, already running, already embedded in the systems that govern whether you get the job, the loan, the apartment, the medical treatment. In 2013, Edward Snowden documented what the National Security Agency had built. A system capable of collecting and storing the phone records, emails, and internet activity of hundreds of millions of people. Not suspected criminals, not foreign agents, ordinary citizens going about their daily lives. The legal authority to do it had been quietly constructed in the years following 2001. By the time it became public knowledge, it had already been running for years. Want to take a guess what it looks like now? The communities that have spent 400 years being watched, tracked, stopped, searched, and cataloged did not suddenly become less visible when the watching went digital. They became more visible, more precisely located, more thoroughly documented. The same zip codes that were redlined in the 1930s are the zip codes that receive the most aggressive algorithmic policing today. The same populations that were surveilled by COINTELPRO in the 1960s and 1970s. Their organizations infiltrated, their leaders monitored, their movements mapped, are the populations whose social media activity, financial transactions, and physical movements are being processed by systems that make COINTELPRO look like a notebook and a pen. The technology changed, and now we are even easier to target. A data intelligence firm, founded with government seed money, now holding a $10 billion Army contract, built a platform that consolidates data from across every available source: utility records, medical records, DMV records, credit histories, location data, social media activity, assembled into a single profile on a single person that no individual agency could have built alone. A sister platform was used to identify and target families, not criminals, not threats, families, for removal. That is not a future capability. That is a documented, contracted, currently operating system, built by people with names, funded by people with names, deployed against people whose only offense was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The blueprint found its most powerful instrument yet, and it does not need a single rogue officer to track you down. They counted on one thing above everything else: that by the time you understood what had been built, the red lines, the sentencing disparities, the algorithmic targeting, the surveillance infrastructure, you would have been ground down so completely, so thoroughly, so deliberately, that resistance would feel not just difficult, but unimaginable. That the exhaustion would be so deep, it would feel like your natural condition, rather than something that was done to you. Have you noticed anything peculiar about the function of the tools so far? Every single one of them operates outside the body. The law, the red line, the algorithm, the surveillance infrastructure, each one built around the body, designed to restrict it, track it, deny it, exhaust it. Powerful, documented, devastating in their accumulated effect. But the frontier that science has now crossed is different. It reaches inside of it, into the genome. The human genome is a blueprint. 3 billion base pairs, each one a letter in an instruction set that determines everything about how a human being is built. The color of your eyes, the architecture of your immune system, the particular way your body processes stress, illness, inherited condition, every physical characteristic you were born with, written in that code before you drew your first breath. Think about what 3 billion means for a moment. If you read one base pair per second without stopping, no sleep, no rest, no pause, it would take you nearly a century to read the full instruction set written inside a single human cell. And every cell in your body carries the complete version of it, every one of them, the full blueprint, present in its entirety in the tip of your finger, in a strand of your hair, in a single tear. For most of human history, that code was considered untouchable, not just scientifically beyond reach, but sacred, the province of God alone. To look too closely at it felt like standing at the edge of something you were never meant to see. Every major religious tradition drew a line at the threshold of human creation and said, "This far and no further." What was written in the blood belonged to the one who wrote it. To rewrite it was to reach for something too high for any human being to grasp. That line has been crossed. The tool that crossed it has a name: CRISPR. A molecular scissors precise enough to find one specific sequence inside 3 billion base pairs and cut it cleanly, exactly. Like finding a single misprint in a library of 10,000 books and correcting it without disturbing a single surrounding word. In the right hands, it is extraordinary. It has already been used to treat sickle cell disease, a condition that has devastated Black Americans at rates no other population bears. Children who would have lived their entire lives in pain have been given relief that no previous generation could have imagined. That is real. That is documented. That is what the tool can do when it is aimed at healing. But a tool does not choose its aim. The hand holding it does. The history of how medical tools and medical access have been used against the covenant people is not speculative. It is documented, and it is specific. Between 1932 and 1972, the United States Public Health Service enrolled 399 Black men in Macon County, Alabama. They had syphilis. They were told they were being treated for bad blood. They were not being treated. They were being observed, studied, documented like lab rats rather than human beings. When penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, the study continued. The men were not told. They were not treated. They were simply watched. 28 died directly of syphilis. 100 died of related complications. 40 wives were infected. 19 children were born into a disease their fathers never knew they were carrying. For 40 years. With government funding. And let me guess, the UN vote surprised you. And then came the cotton swab in a small cardboard box. $49. Prepaid postage. The promise of what was taken from you 400 years ago. Your origin, your people. Handed back for the price of a tank of gas. Millions of Black Americans sent their DNA to ancestry testing companies. Not out of carelessness, out of love. Out of the deep and legitimate hunger to know what was deliberately, violently erased. To find out which coast of Africa she stood on before the ships came. To give her back the dignity they took. That hunger is real. That need was earned. Every bit of it. What was not fully understood was what happened to the sample after it was swabbed. At least one major testing company voluntarily handed its database of nearly 2 million genetic profiles to the FBI. A court order forced another to open its entire database to law enforcement, including the profiles of users who had explicitly opted out. And when one platform was hacked, 1 million users who had chosen privacy found themselves opted into law enforcement access overnight. You were looking for your grandmother's essence. Someone else was building a map. Now consider what CRISPR makes possible. A tool precise enough to find a specific genetic sequence, including the ancestral markers that identify the essence of a specific people, and alter it. Silently, without announcement, without a signature. A wound that might not surface for years, for decades. Moving through families and communities, before anyone understood what they were looking at. That is not a claim about what has been done. It is a documentation of what is now scientifically possible. The tool exists. The map of the covenant people's genome exists. The history of what has already been done with far cruder instruments exists. What any honest person does with those 3 facts together, you already know. Enoch did not write poetry, but what he left behind has the quality of something older than language itself. A record so precise, so structured, so exactly correspondent to what has unfolded across the centuries, that calling it prophecy almost undersells it. He was shown the full arc of human time, not in fragments, not in symbols waiting to be decoded by scholars in quiet rooms. In weeks, each one given a character, each character arriving on schedule, each season of history landing exactly where the record said it would. He wrote it down before any of it existed. And it has been arriving ever since, week by week, era by era. Each generation living inside a chapter that was already written, whether they knew it or not. He called it the apocalypse of weeks. 10 weeks covering the full span of human history, from the first breath of creation to the final reckoning. The first week, righteousness established. The second, the great flood, and the world remade. The third, Abraham called out from among the nations, a covenant spoken over a people not yet born. The fourth, the law given at Sinai. The fifth, the temple raised on the hill. The sixth, the scattering, the people carried into captivity, dispersed among nations that did not know them. 6 weeks. Every one of them arrived exactly as written. And then he wrote the seventh. The seventh week is the week of the apostate generation. The week where wickedness does not merely continue, it perfects itself. Where the instruments of control become so sophisticated, so automated, so precisely targeted, that no single hand needs to sign the order. Where the blueprint is no longer carried, it is embedded, running without a face, deciding without a conscience. You have just watched that week documented in real time. And here is what the seventh week says next. Not in spite of everything that was just described, but because of it. At its close shall be elected the elect righteous, to receive sevenfold instruction concerning all his creation. Do you hear what is being said? The apex of the apostate generation and the awakening of the covenant people are not one after the other. They are both at the same time. The most sophisticated the system has ever been is the exact same moment the people it was built to suppress are being equipped to see it clearly, to name it, to understand not just what it is, but where it sits on the calendar God drew before any of it existed. That is not coincidence. That is the structure of the week itself. That's letting you know that God is not late. The surveillance architecture was not built because the ideology is winning. The biological tools were not developed because the covenant is broken. The blueprint was not automated because the appointed time is being pushed further out. It was automated because something is ending. And the people who built it can feel that, even if they cannot name what they feel. We know that God is moving. And before the week was named, before the calendar was written, before a single empire had risen or fallen or put on a new uniform, God hung a sign in the sky. Not a subtle one, not a symbol requiring scholarship to decode. A blood moon. The full face of it turning the color of what had been shed. Visible to anyone who looked up. Speaking in a language older than any human tongue. God speaking directly to the earth in the language of the heavens. The ancient astronomers knew. The shepherds knew. Every civilization that has ever looked up at the night sky has known that what moves above is not decoration. It is God speaking. The cosmos confirming what the covenant already promised. When you see the blood moon rising, you are not seeing a phenomenon. You are reading a coordinate. A waypoint on a map drawn before the foundations of the earth were laid. Telling you exactly where you are, telling you exactly what time it is. You are here. The map says so. And the map has never been wrong. Every instrument this episode has named, the ideology that predated the nation, the surveillance architecture that reaches into your Wi-Fi, the biological frontier that reaches into your genome, none of it appeared outside the frame of what was spoken over you in Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. It is all inside the appointed time. Every instrument, every century, every iteration of the blueprint. Which means the God who named the captivity before the captivity existed has been watching every one of them build it. And the God who drew the map knows exactly where you are right now. And somewhere, beneath the weight of everything this episode has documented, something is stirring. Not loudly, not yet, but Ezekiel heard it too. The text was written for people living inside exactly what you have just watched documented. Enoch named the week before the week existed. The blood moon confirmed the coordinate. And a monk in Ethiopia kept the manuscript across 2,000 years of silence, so that you could read it now, in the moment it was written for. You are not living through the permanent condition. You are living through the close of the appointed time. And the God who drew the map knows exactly where you are right now.